All right. Good morning, everyone. This is the April 9, 2021 meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Agriculture and Ecosystem Subcommittee. It's a beautiful spring day here in Vermont, and hopefully we can dispense with our work quickly today. We sent out an agenda a little late, apologies, but hopefully everyone has that. The first agenda item is to review the agenda and minutes. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on the agenda. We did just get the minutes in from Ryan earlier this morning. Folks won't have a chance to review those. So why don't we put the minutes from last meeting on next week's agenda, if that's agreeable to folks, and we'll get them out to you in advance. So any changes to this week's agenda that folks would like to see? Okay. So the first topic here is the Technical Assistance RFP. I believe Jane had set that out to folks a day or so ago. I think we'd like to get everyone's feedback on it to the extent you have any. And Jane, it would be helpful to understand, we've got a task group focused on the carbon budget. That's an element of this. And I don't know if there's still room for that group to kind of weigh in a more detailed way on that piece, if that's necessary at this point in time, or if so if you can just kind of speak to our role in that piece and the RFP broadly going forward. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, everybody. Morning, and I'll start sort of with like my tail between my legs and just apologize that I wasn't able to coordinate more closely with the subset of you on the carbon budget ahead of today's meeting, but fret not. I do feel like there's ample time still to weigh in and get opinions. It's been a lot of cooks in the kitchen, which has been made for, I think, hopefully a really robust and valuable RFP, but it's been a lot of folks to coordinate opinions on and take in. And so that's why I have seen a few. I haven't actually gotten to read most of my email this morning, but I have seen some of you have weighed in via email, and I welcome that dialogue to happen now where appropriate. But I'll just sort of give a rundown on where we are with the RFP and what our goal is with respect to the process of sort of executing it at this point. It's had some substantive changes, but not particularly to the nature of the work, just really around how we articulate what we're asking for. And it's been a lot of close coordination with DEC's air quality division, recognizing that the first thing around the greenhouse gas inventory review and critique, as well as the carbon budget, which ultimately is informed by the greenhouse gas inventory. And then finally, the last point in the RFP, the monitoring and assessment framework, all sort of tie really closely in with the work of that division and thinking about setting us up long term for how we replicate and stay on top of the work that we'll get out of this consultant analysis. So there's been a lot of back and forth with them, as well as the Public Service Department and cross-sector. And one of the big changes from cross-sector was putting together what was 4 and 5 in the previous RFP and sort of using what was set up as in 5 for sort of the time, the different statutory requirements with the greenhouse gas reduction, using that to actually frame up the deliverables for number 4 rather than having it be a standalone item. And so I think that, in general, we're in a really good place. I recognize that there's still someone, myself, as well as our attorney, needs to go through it with a fine-tooth comb for like minor grammatical errors and typos. And so really what I'd like to focus your review on, as I suggested in my email and as Billy did, you all obviously have the biggest stake and interest in the carbon budget, and how that then also relates to the greenhouse gas inventory, as well as the monitoring and assessment framework. And also to a lesser extent, number 4 now, which speaks to how you'll be thinking about ag emission reductions and strategies and policies to put in place for those. So I want to offer this chance to have a conversation. I also want to offer, if Allie feels up to it, sort of her giving her the chance, because she really is the author of the carbon budget component of the technical analysis here, to speak to her rationale and thoughts behind it. And then after we can have a little bit of dialogue or discourse about it, I'm also happy to share it and put it up on the screen. Suggest if there's more to do after this meeting, suggest a timeline and recommend a subset of you to work with me going forward, recognizing that the goal was to get it out today, but being mindful that two people from science and data and someone from cross sector who has a lot of experience with proposals for these type of sorts of nature are going through it today also for me. And so mindful of that, the fast timeline, I think that we're in a good place, if not to get it out today, to get it out early next week. I will also just sort of caution that learning how hard it's been to get the communication and engagement contract on board, that, you know, beginning of May might be ambitious to have these contractual services in place. And I just put that out there as we start to think about work planning and how we advance towards the goal of the climate action plan because of the December 1st date, because I think realistically at this point, it's going to be at least mid-May before these contracts are in place, and just sets us up for longer timeline of getting the analysis that we're asking for done. Although I do think the components of the greenhouse gas inventory critique, as well as the carbon budget, can sort of hit the ground running as soon as the contract is in place. So those components we should be well positioned to have done in a timely manner. So why don't I pause there and know that Ryan, Allie, well, let me start with Allie and ask Allie if you would like me to share the screen with the carbon budget part of the technical analysis contract or RFP, and see if you want to talk through how you framed it up.
Sure, I'm happy to do that if that would be helpful to folks.
Thank you, Allie, for being put on the spot. Everybody can see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So I scrolled right down to that. And one of the things I'll just note, like other changes around here, was the idea of teeing up deliverables that came out of the scope of services so that we could do a better job with teeing up performance measures that would ultimately go into how the contractors get paid in an iterative process. So that was the rationale for those. Allie, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so just a couple things to start is I want to make this clear that this carbon budget is an inventory. It's an inventory of, the idea here is using the best data that we have, which for some of these pools we have more data for some pools than others. And by pools, I mean things like the carbon in our forests, or the flux of carbon from our forests versus agriculture versus wetlands versus shrublands and grasslands. So it's really an inventory of stocks, so that how much is in those pools, and also the fluxes, the change in stock in those pools to the best of our ability. And this helps us identify those, but also identify maybe where we're lacking data, where we need more data, maybe where there's more uncertainty in those estimates. And so we need to be careful that this isn't a baseline or a benchmark. It is the current state of our carbon stocks and fluxes in Vermont. And that helps us understand, what the current status is. And also then we can re-inventory in a certain amount of time. Maybe we'll have better data, maybe not, but we re-inventory and see if those have changed 5 or 10 years. So I want to make that clear, because a lot of these, especially the fluxes, change based on human decisions. Our decisions that we make on the landscape, they can change based on weather events, disturbances. So it's just really the most recent data we have. I also suggested that because of those fluctuations that can happen from all these different aspects, human and natural changes, we should consider this over a time frame. So average out over whatever the data allow. I did base a lot of this on what the main carbon budget does, but recognizing that we don't have to follow this, or the contractor that we select does not have to follow that main carbon budget exactly. We might decide that there's some different ways we want to look at this, different ways we want to portray it here in Vermont. But that's kind of gives us the basis of what to look at. Yeah, I think that's, and so first we have the stocks suggesting, and again, it's really, you'll see if data allow, one of our biggest limitations are going to be data sources for these stocks. And then on the next page, Jane, if you scroll down, are fluxes. And when I say all pools, the contractor should know what that means, but within something like a forest or a wetland, you can have different pools of carbon within that. So in a forest, you have live trees, you can have dead wood on the ground, you have soil, etc. So for some of these, we might not be able to estimate. Soils, for example, are really challenging. Agriculture, so Alyssa's saying agriculture and emissions. Yes, I think, Alyssa, I think that agriculture, animal, and manure emissions might be included already in the greenhouse gas estimate. Ryan might be able to comment on that more.
They are. I just was noticing they're not on your list, but yeah, they are in the current one.
Yeah, I guess that's maybe what I meant by soils and other emissions. But yeah, that's a good point that could be more implicitly stated. Agriculture folks should go through this with a more fine-tooth comb than I've provided. I'm much more of a natural ecosystem person, so that's helpful.
There was one suggestion, and I think I've seen an email response about this back from you, but haven't read it closely, is the from the DC folks about referencing standards here and rather than listing stocks and fluxes, like listing what they're included in the IPCC guidelines. Just the benefit of listing.
Yeah,
out.
that's sort of a policy or regulatory decision we might want to make. It's really the same. It's how we package these. So the IPCC has certain ways that they view what is included in what they include in greenhouse gas estimates, emissions, and sequestration. I think we can frame it however we want, and we could repackage these in different ways. So that's sort of up to folks. And again, this carbon budget isn't design. The intent is for information, for us to have, inventory. It's not really to say, oh, these are places we're going to reduce emissions. It might be, but it might just be for us to know as a state, what are our total stocks? What are our total fluxes on average?
That's great. I'll just say that. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry.
Yeah, you go.
No. Well, I was just going to go into just an ag question about the protocol and the federal framework for this. So if you have a more relevant follow-up, please share.
Well, I was only speaking to the point that I think with both 1 and 2, the idea has been to leave it as broad and flexible as we can in the RFP to allow for that dialogue and refinement around methodology to come back between the subcommittees and specifically with A&R technical staff who want to make sure that the long-term interests of the agency who have to store and ultimately use this data going forward ensure that it's replicable. So number 1, about the greenhouse gas inventory, there's been a lot of feedback to sort of narrow in on the goal of that work. And I think we've inherently kept it broad in order to continue to facilitate a conversation about what we really want out of that with the consultant. And I kind of feel like that's the same with number 2. So go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks. What you just shared, I think speaks to the agency's general comments on this topic area. And then just to explicate the soil carbon budget, right? How the EPA's framework exists is you have agricultural emissions in one bucket, And then you look at the land use and land use change, which includes the ag soil carbon flux in another bucket, and the two don't really cross. And so kind of that holistic question of accounting, and if you account for cropland remaining cropland and then other transitions that may happen one way or the other, how would that influence Vermont's current inventory or not? I think that's an important question for the contractor to review, perhaps how it's done in other states, and provide some recommendations or options perhaps for the Climate Council to consider.
Thank you. That's great. So more than happy to give space and a reasonable timeline for folks to look specifically at these components of the technical analysis. As I said, I've had a lot of folks going through the broader RFP, and at this point, I'm sort of going to call that and just suggest that A&R staff will advance like the cleanup of the final components. But really, for interest of the subcommittees, we want to make sure that what we're asking for is what you all want for your work, and so I'm more than happy to consider input still. I mean, I could, if at this point, we'll just say through the weekend and by Monday at the end of the day, if I'm hearing general consensus that folks would like some time with the carbon budgets specifically, just to make sure they're comfortable with the way it's drafted.
Sounds good to
me. And recognizing that I also have comments probably in my email right now that I will address also today.
Charlie.
I just had a quick clarifying question for Ali. On the fluxes, the forests, net biomass, soil sequestration, and sedimentation export, can you just define sedimentation export so that we're on what we're talking about?
Yeah, fancy term just to mean how carbon from the soil is exported from systems via waterways. So carbon, gets dissolved in water, eroded in soils, and can go into water bodies. And it can then settle in those water bodies, but some of it will eventually get exported out, to wherever that water body ends up in the ocean. So that is part of the overall carbon budget. And there is data to provide those estimates.
Okay, great, thank you.
Lauren, I think you have a hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say over this meeting to appreciate Ali, you and Jane, your work on this, but also Ali, specifically appreciating that baseline and benchmark conversation. We talked a little bit about it last week, but I do think it's important that, words matter. And if we're calling something a benchmark or a baseline, there's an inherent value tied to it that we don't necessarily want to attribute to this moment in time, but that we do still need like a data anchor. So making sure that we still have that, but recognizing we shouldn't call it a benchmark or a baseline is important. And then also just more broadly, I think based on all the tasks in here, it'd be pretty impressive if we could find a single group that could do all of the work. But that said, I do think there's so much overlap and importance in understanding 1 and 2 that if it is to be a different consultant or contractor or expert working on it, that we would bake in some requirement that they would have some cross collaboration, because we don't want to overcount, double count, undercount any on either. So just flagging that as making sure those work streams are tied closely is important.
Yeah, and I would argue 5 too, because the monitoring and assess framework is going to be, really tied to the greenhouse gas inventory. So yes, we're thinking about that too. So thank you.
Okay. Oh, Charlie, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, just one more question on the budgeting. And this might be a de minimis amount of stuff, but any thought to how we're accounting for carbon stocks that are no longer available on our ledger? For example, some of the projects that have developed selling carbon credits. Is there going to be any kind of accounting for that in here?
I mean, those cannot count towards our greenhouse gas reductions, right? So that's the gist of it.
Is there going to be an inventory of that and not a separate budget, but some accounting for that in the budget?
Yeah, we haven't, Ali, we haven't
yeah,
talked. We have an A&R carbon work group right now that's talking about this a lot
Yeah.
that I sit on and Allie chairs. But
yeah, and I'm actually in conversations with a broader group too, with the U.S. Climate Alliance to talk about this. Like, how do we what there is this, carbon markets are great, carbon offsets are awesome, but there is this concern as we have more of them that we are selling off the sequestration power of our forests to another entity. And if we want to use that power to account for our state level offsets, we need to be mindful of that. And right now it's like Charlie said, it's really not, we don't have a lot of acreage in Vermont. But if we got up to a quarter of our acreage or half of our acreage that is enrolled in a carbon offset market, it would be a big loss of our ability to count that sequestration. I do have that inventory, so we could, I could provide that to the contractors. It would be something that we should be mindful of. Yeah, I don't know how we want to include that, but it's a good point, Charlie.
It seems like it could at least be captured in that kind of baseline of, here's what is already allocated elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
we've got
I mean,
some
it also
sense of
gets
scale
at the
as the conversation goes.
Of life cycle emissions on the inventory and thinking about all of that.
Yeah, I will say the only thing is it's really hard. It's apples to oranges. The way that the carbon offsets are the counting works is very different than what we're talking about here. We're talking about net sequestration over time. So time 1 to time 2, what's the change in the amount of carbon storage in that forest? The way a carbon offset project works is a little bit different than that. So we'll really have to think about how we compare those numbers, because it's not as simple as that. But yeah, it's a good point.
That's interesting. Any other feedback at this point, or if not specific feedback, any comment on the proposed timeline of recognition that it would, by Monday, I would need any other feedback that you have? And maybe just a general gestalt of how many people might think that that is something that they want to do, rather than have already provided me feedback, because that would be helpful in knowing if I'm waiting for folks to.
Jane, this is Ryan. We'll work to prepare comments for you for Monday,
Thank you.
Specific to the carbon budget.
That would be really great. Thanks, Ryan.
Jane, this is Alyssa here. I'll look at it this afternoon and send you comments as well.
Thank you so much.
Great. Well, this is taking a nice form. Thanks for the work everyone's already put into it, and for your additional work over the next couple of days, and look forward to seeing the final RFP. Any other questions, comments on this topic before we move on? Okay. So the next bit that we have on our agenda is discussion of what I've been calling the ranking matrix, but I think Lauren has a better name for it that she's been using. But this is kind of the tool that we're trying to develop as a way to make sure to prioritize our eventual recommendations. And I think Lauren sent, we just looked at one a little bit last week. Lauren sent out a revised draft based on that conversation earlier this week. And I think if it's okay with you, Lauren, we'll pass it over to you, and you can kind of walk us through what you've shared and get folks' input on it.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. I might actually hot potato it over. After presenting that spreadsheet and getting really good feedback from you all last week, I got an email from David saying he has lots of thoughts on the co-benefits and did some lit review for different processes that are considering how we quantify and incorporate co-benefits into prioritization frameworks. And then Alyssa joined the mix too, and so we kind of have a proposed co-benefits ranking opportunity assessment, a multi-criteria analysis assessment that I'd love either David or Alyssa to walk through, since I had a lot of mic time last time. And then also just say that I talked a bit about it with Judy too, and she has some good thoughts to share, but it's very much in draft form, and I'm happy to pull it up on my screen for either David or Alyssa, whoever wants to take the mic for that presentation part.
Well, I'm actually happy to do a quick intro, but I'm wondering, Alyssa, you did such a nice job of writing up that narrative, which I thought was such a helpful explanation. If you'd be willing to use that to talk to folks, I can just give, a really quick overview of my thinking.
Yeah, why don't you give an introduction, and then maybe I can get into the details of where the discussion is at.
Awesome. So I'll just give kind of, having been in lots of, policy meetings and discussions about kind of trying to consider what are the best approaches and weighing pros and cons. I've been through the both the human dynamics around those conversations, as well as the kind of different positions that people approach this from advocacy. And one of the challenges with complex environmental problem solving, particularly ones that have significant economic impacts, are that they're so complex. And so people try to come up with systems, and cost benefit is typically traditionally the one that many people have turned to. You assign everything a cost, and then you just compare the costs, and you make the choice that has the greatest benefit, versus costs. And that tends not to be the most, in my experience, the most effective way to make decisions in this kind of setting. One, there's a whole set of values that we place on these things that are either not quantifiable at all, or to the extent that they're quantifiable, they're really hard to put a dollar amount on. And that inherently represents a whole set of value judgments anyway. So it kind of creates the false impression of objectivity. So there's one of the methodologies that's been increasingly used in the context of climate change has been multi-criteria analysis, where you essentially identify what are the key criteria that are important to you as a group or a decision-making body, and then you evaluate both the qualitative and the quantitative, to the extent you can, implications of that decision. And you use some kind of a process, and there's lots of different ways to do that, but you try to give some kind of weighting process that doesn't try to pretend that it's, physics or math, but gives at least some way to kind of have a directional indication of whether we think it's a good idea or bad idea. So that was the concept behind the matrix that we've put together. And there's already, just between the three of us, a whole set of judgments that went into it that this group, I think, should wrestle with and reconsider. But at the same time, it does give a pathway both for us to kind of have a rational discussion, to identify where we have disagreements and focus on those areas. And then ultimately, for both the public and for the ultimate audience, the decision makers that look at this information, it's very transparent. They can look at this information and realize that there was no secret hidden agendas. Here's exactly what people were thinking and what they were valuing or not valuing. And those decision makers can reach their own opinion about that. So with that, maybe Alyssa, I could just turn it over to you to kind of provide a little more detail.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, David. Lauren, would you share your screen so that we can just walk through the document that we created? I think that's the best way to do this.
Just 1 second. Are you seeing it?
Right. Oh, it's so small here. Okay. Great. Okay. So we
Do you guys
share
know
this
the
with
trick on, sorry to interrupt, but do you know the trick how if folks want to zoom in on their screen, if you hold control with the mouse and you roll over it, it makes it bigger to how big you want it to be. So it's helpful when reading. Sorry.
Thank you. No, I didn't know that trick. That's really helpful. Okay. So essentially, we think the advantages of this type of process are, one, that we can incorporate really different kinds of criteria together that should be considered into the decision making. And it also allows us to combine in the intangible and kind of qualitative assessments with really quantifiable and quantitative data. It'll help us communicate within our committee about how we're making decisions, and then also provide transparency to the public. And so, this little paragraph really kind of explains what's in the matrix. So it's reference for later, but I think, Lauren, let's move to the next parts, and I'll just walk us through what the matrix looks like. Yeah, okay, so essentially here on the left column are the kind of categories of criteria that we might consider when we're evaluating or prioritizing different strategies and programs within our work. So some of the considerations that we know already are kind of like on our radar: climate resilience, environmental benefits. We have this category called cultural capital, which kind of fits some of those intangible benefits to people. Community cohesion is something we think we should consider in our decision making, as well as public health, outdoor recreation, the impacts on the rural working economy, food security. And so there could be a number of others in that kind of large bucket criteria on the left. The second column here is kind of sub-criteria for some of the big ones, so we can break it out in that way. And the way this would work is that these two columns called qualitative impacts and quantitative measures are places for us to make notes about the information that we have to support any idea of what we know about the impact of, say, a strategy or a program that we're evaluating on those things. And so we can include both quantitative and qualitative data. And then the key piece here is that we might use this directionality column to indicate whether or not the program or strategy that we're evaluating has a positive, negative, or neutral impact on that criteria. So for example, does this program have a positive, negative, or neutral impact on flood resilience? Does it have a positive, negative, or neutral impact on drought resilience? Does it have, what kind of impact does it have on Vermonters' sense of place, cultural identity, community cohesion? And so we're allowing ourselves to really combine a lot of different types of criteria together. The key part about of this that I think is going to be the most challenging, but also really important, is that instead of just counting each type of criteria as a 1 on their own, we want to assign maybe a weighting measure to each. So we'll assign directionality, and then maybe as a group, we all vote on which of these pieces are most important for us to consider. Say maybe we could include equity in here or after this process, but maybe we would assign that a heavy weight. And that piece will multiply the directionality by that weighting measure and get like an ultimate score for each of our programs or strategies that we're evaluating. And so you'll see that like this weighting piece would be kind of one of the biggest factors in influencing our overall decision making. And that is something that we would like to have like a facilitated process to decide, and maybe do some voting that really combines everyone's opinions about. So that's kind of the general big walkthrough. Does anyone have big questions right now? Also, Lauren and David, if I missed anything critical, please jump in.
I have a question. I think this is a great framework, and has the opportunity to be refined a little further, but is a great first step. Do you envision applying this broadly to all the recommendations? Or I would imagine we'd have to kind of bucket out the different kind of categories that we're focused on and then score within those categories. That's kind of what's being envisioned here.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That works. Thanks.
Yeah, it's definitely a draft. So we would hope that everyone would contribute to refining the criteria and the sub-criteria that are important to everyone. And there's pieces that we talked a lot about and put in some details. We might pick a different sub-criteria breakup for climate resilience than what's on the screen here. We've been looking at different existing frameworks for how resilience is evaluated in other systems, and that might be a nice thing to add. Lauren.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just a bit of context. I'm going to stop screen sharing and re-screen share, but we'll come back to this. But just a higher level, I think, Billy, this might also help. This highlighted box here, that total assessment score that considers the co-benefits, the trade-offs, the weighting that I think should be facilitated conversation, like Alyssa said, would theoretically, give me just one more second, fold into this part of the framework that I presented on last week, so that there would be, Billy, to your point, a conversation again about the different task area,
Gotcha.
What the strategy is, and then each of those individual rankings for that really important transparency in our decision making could be like an addendum to this overall. Here
Gotcha.
is where all of our strategies lie. Here's the really succinct number that we gave based on that larger ranking matrix, which I'll pull back up now. But just to let you figure out, like this is the place where we're going to catch it all, and then the other one will be where the ranking happens.
That works. Thank you. Judy, do you have a comment or question?
So I see there's another.
I'm looking at the chart. I see that my opinions were not included in this, so I'd like to share them at this time. I think the use of the word resilient, like flood resilient, should include adaptation, because it's one thing to have the ability to recover. It's another to totally adapt and go in another path. So every place there's resilience, I think there also needs to be adaptation. And as far as cultural capital, I think we need to promote cultural and social, because we don't know all the different cultural components to identity, sense of place, spiritual, aesthetic, and so on. So we have to include social in there as well. And the community cohesion is to, in my mind, to break down barriers, but we also need social cohesion to create a sense of solidarity. And so whether a program or a project determines community or social cohesion. Thank you.
Yeah, Judy, I just hadn't gone through yet our notes when you and I talked a couple of afternoons ago. You also had something about, I'm looking back at our notes from our call, sustainability being folded in, and I think you wanted that down in the economies. Is that right? And if so, I have my notes, but honestly, I can't even read the second part of my own handwriting. So if you could point me to the right spot, I'll put it in now.
Yeah. So again, when you're talking about economy, economy is like something that people just want more of. So if you make $10, you want 20. If you make 20, you want 30. And so in those areas, I would use the word outdoor something with sustainable in there, sustainable recreational economy, or a rural working land that is sustainable. Because again, to me, to put economy in the forefront defeats the purpose of all the other stuff. Although there is importance to a sustainable economy for survival.
Great. So thanks, Judy. I certainly agree with those, and it sounds like Lauren is going to be able to incorporate your thoughts. Lauren and Alyssa and David, do you envision that the kind of each task group would help refine the sub criteria for their charge effectively and feed it into this larger effort?
Alyssa came off mute. I'd love for her thoughts, but generally speaking, I would love for each of the task conversations to be using the same tool, so that when we come back and fold it into our larger subcommittee conversation, we have something that's replicable and can speak crosstalk across the different subcommittees. And I think as long as we talk as a group and make sure that we're all comfortable with what's in there, both in the criteria and sub-criteria, then we should be good to go for using the same exact form in each task.
Okay. My question was more whether you envision the different task groups having different, by necessity, having different criteria, right? Like, some groups are going to be focusing on emissions reductions. Other folks are be focusing on adaptation as kind of their top line goals. And just curious if you need, if this matrix would need to be adjusted to address that, or whether you think these can work generally across all the task groups once they get finalized. Does that make sense?
I would like to see it used across the board. Go ahead, Alyssa.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think the intent was this would be the co-benefits evaluation tool for everything, and that it would be the same across the board. It might be something that could be adopted or informed into other subcommittees of the Climate Council if it's a successful tool and strategy and works for us. I think the next thing to decide for our group is if everyone is on board with this as a good strategy, and then how we go about incorporating everyone's input into the tool and getting kind of a final version of it. And that could happen, you know, people could email stuff and Lauren and David and I can incorporate that together and then represent it, or we could have a facilitated discussion.
Okay. Jake's had his hand up, so why don't we go to him and then we can come back to that question.
Yeah, a bit of a clarifying question. So I know that equity was mentioned as potentially a factor for weighting, but and maybe this is my input here, I'm jumping the gun, but looking at this, it does make me think that making that an explicit set criteria for all of these higher level criteria. So if you're looking at a recommendation around climate resilience, that sort of the equitable distribution of the impact or the benefit is a part of that sub criteria consideration, as it would be for the environment, cultural capital. So I could see it working either way, but I just want to make sure that absolutely we do kind of, I think, make sort of equity an explicit factor one way or the other in doing this analysis in this matrix.
That's great feedback. Yeah, we had thought of some kind of sub-criteria for equity being its own big criteria, but I love the idea of putting it into all of them. You know, it's interesting to think about what we might be using this to evaluate it against. And in some places, it'll be really easy to say, you know, yes or no or directionality. In others, it's hard. You know, if we're looking at like wetland restoration, it's hard to evaluate it against which communities would be impacted by that or not. But for some programs, it probably will be very explicit.
Yeah. Thanks.
Abby, did you have something you wanted to say or ask?
Well, hi. I'm sorry I can't turn my video on because my internet is not working well enough for me to do so. I wanted to echo Lauren and Alyssa's thoughts that I think that everything, regardless of what the focus is, whether it's emissions, adaptation, or resilience, that we should all be filtering all of that through this matrix. I think we get into some dangerous territory when we're not having to think about the entirety of the picture and are just single-mindedly thinking about one goal or another. And this allows for us to have filtered all of our thinking through one matrix, which I think is important.
Yeah, and I agree. I got a little lost in my own thinking and forgot we were talking about the co-benefits piece. So I think I agree with you completely. I was focused on the primary benefit of some of our tasks, but that this co-benefit analysis makes sense to be universal across all of our work. Okay, so I guess going back to Alyssa's kind of larger question of how do we move this forward as a group? Sounded like the options were, or the suggestion was for folks to review this further, to email comments, questions, suggestions to a smaller group of our members, and then to come together at one of these meetings with our facilitator to talk through it and finalize it. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Billy. I think the other piece that's really important is that maybe we have some kind of survey or way for each of our members to vote on the weighting aspect of this, because that will be, I think that's really critical for that piece to be facilitated and be really transparent and not be just that could be a really long discussion. But it'd be great to have facilitators involved and also use maybe some kind of voting system to just make it a little more efficient.
Absolutely. Okay, thoughts from the group? Okay, silence suggests general agreement. Alyssa, Lauren, David, do you have a kind of a time frame, or what's the horizon for this work in your mind that would work?
Well, I don't honestly have one, and I think we as a group, I'm happy to suggest one, but I think we should move pretty quickly. Honestly, I think we should not try to get this perfect. Spend a lot of time on it, and we should be willing to adjust it as we go if we find that it's not working. But that we should pretty quickly settle on it. And the other variable that's important for us to think about as a group is how do we get the strategies down on paper? Because I think pretty quickly we need to start defining what it is that we're evaluating. And in some ways, the two things may start to blend together as we go forward. We may start adding, new ideas later down in the process. But anyway, I'm in favor of moving more quickly and spending less time at a theoretical level and more in an applied, on the ground way.
Makes sense. So given that, when would you like initial feedback? Assuming the three of you are willing to kind of keep moving this forward, when would you like feedback from the broader group?
Well, seeing as how this is kind of like a two-step process, first it's coming to agreement on what criteria we're actually considering, and then followed by how we want to weight them through that survey that I think is a good tool, and then through a facilitated conversation. Maybe we can aim, and David, I don't know if this is going to be ambitious enough on your timeline, but at our meeting next Friday that we come to consensus on what's actually in here as far as the criteria, and then the following Friday we'll have a facilitated conversation, ideally maybe with CBI, but I would rely on Jane to be able to tell us if that's possible, for the actual making, and come to an agreement 2 weeks from now on how we weight.
Okay, so just to restate, you'd like comments on the criteria themselves in advance of next week, the meeting on the 16th, and then we would discuss it, hopefully finalize it, then come back the week after that, I guess was at the 23rd, with facilitation to talk about weighting.
Yeah, I think that timeline makes sense to me, but happy for rebuttals from the committee.
And you may have said that, but with that, when would you like comments from this group on the criteria themselves in advance of next week's meeting?
It didn't say that. Maybe I want people to have enough time to really think thoughtfully about it. So maybe Wednesday close of business.
I think that's a great suggestion, Lauren. That'll give us time on Thursday to put it all together, but also give people ample time to look through it.
Okay. Our first bit of homework will be to get comments to this group by close of business on Wednesday. And is there a point person that, and I'm maybe going to look to Jane here, is there one person in particular that those should be sent to? Jane, is it okay if it goes to a broader group? Should they go through Abby or I? Any thoughts there?
I haven't had that question yet, but I imagine that as long as one person, whoever that one person is collecting data, collecting the information without disseminating it to a quorum, that would be fine.
Should we Lauren, do you mind being that point person?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. So we'll get comments to you by the close of business Wednesday. All right. Well, great. Thank you all for this work. This is exciting. John, you've got your hand up.
Billy, just, I'm sorry, but this document that we've just been looking at, has that actually been sent to us all? Because I can't find it in an email. So I would love if I could have a copy of it, please.
Certainly, I don't believe it has gone out, so we'll get
Okay.
that out to the group today.
Okay, good. Well, that's a sense of relief that I haven't.
Yeah, I was rummaging through my inbox myself trying to find it when we first started. So
It would be very hard for you to provide comment without it, so you'll get it shortly after this meeting.
Very, very good point, Lauren.
And comments are not just related to the co-benefits portion of the matrix, but more broadly, the ranking for feasibility, cost effectiveness, et cetera, is part of that comment package, if I'm understanding that correctly, that we should prepare?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to kind of check in with everyone and make, not everyone's participating in this conversation, just make sure the larger group is comfortable with this approach, understanding there'll be opportunities to comment further. So if anyone does have any kind of reservations or questions before we move on, please, share them. Okay, looking good. Well, thank you all for this work and your willingness to continue it. I think this will be a really helpful way for us to structure our ranking and analysis. And, David, I appreciate, ooh, bird just flew into my window. I appreciate your statement that we probably need to give some thought to how we define and articulate our strategies so that there is kind of consistency across and amongst the groups so that we can filter and rank them in as uniform way as possible going forward. So we'll need to figure out how to work that into our conversation as well. Yeah, David, please.
Sorry, I'm still adapting to the right protocols in this kind of conversation, even a year into it. I know it doesn't work to quite just blurt stuff out. But anyway, one additional thought about this is that is thinking about how we utilize the agency staff and or state employee staff that are working on this. That there may be this exercise may also create some really helpful definition for us as a group of identifying big gaps in our knowledge or questions that we have. That it also occurred to me this might be a good work management tool as well if we think about it that way.
That's a great suggestion. And I did not include it on the agenda, but we did have a conversation with the state of Vermont staff, and they've helped identify which task groups they feel like they've got the interest and expertise to support in a targeted way. So we can share that information a little bit later this morning so that the task leads know who they can lean on for that assistance. All right, let's see. Anything else on this topic? Great. Well, thank you again. Oh, wait. David, is your hands up anew? No. Okay. So the next, sorry, I'm trying to go between a number of different screens and it gets confusing. So the next thing we've got up here is an update on the inventory of existing programs. Not a ton to share on that right now. We did have a good conversation with the folks from the Ag Agency and A&R who are helping staff our group talk about their role in this effort. And I think we've kind of teased this out into two different buckets of work. One is more along the lines of an annotated bibliography or a resource, a compilation of resources that are relevant to the work of this group. And, you all committee members have shared resources and, existing programs and strategies with us already. From those submissions, Marley Roop from A&R or from DEC has begun to kind of pull together this annotated bibliography of resources. And I'll ask Marley to speak about that in a second. Excuse me, the other piece is the inventory of existing programs that work towards our goals. And I think we've kind of hit the pause button on that a little bit based on some feedback from Jane that there's kind of a broader conversation. This is a requirement of the Act to compile this inventory. Some work has already been done with the full council. And I think we're just waiting to kind of better understand how the broader council effort is going to pull that inventory together. Is that a accurate representation of what you told us, Jane, or totally wrong?
Somewhere in the middle. So we haven't talked about this collectively at the full council level in a while, but what I did share with you is that in advance of some of the early council meetings, there was a lot of legwork done by State of Vermont staff to put together presentations, and along with that included some preliminary, well, I wouldn't say preliminary, some thoughtful inventory work around program strategies, initiatives within state government that are working to advance the different work of the subcommittees. And that was led and spearheaded by AOT staff. And those AOT staff serve on the Rural Resilience Subcommittee now. And so I wanted to just put a pause in it because they're working to sort of revisit that inventory and do it, ensure it's comprehensive. And I kind of see it perhaps as a pass off then to you all, or done in close collaboration with you all. So rather than, because I should say that many of the rural resilience, the programs for resiliency overlap with the program work here, and they were done very collaboratively with A&R staff, ACCD staff, and beyond. And so I think that list for the inventory component of the statute is pretty robust. It is nowhere near complete yet, but I think it would be good to sort of all be working towards one comprehensive inventory. And since rural resilience is moving quite fast with this, with Joe Segali taking the lead from AOT, I thought that they have a task group working on that right now, and I'd like to meet with them and then see how we involve ag and ecosystems and then more broadly the other subcommittees. So.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Thanks, Jane. So I think what I heard was we'll continue to invite any input from this group on existing programs and strategies. We'll hold those. Once we get the first cut at the list from rural resilience, we'll add what we have at a staff level. Then we'll put it back out to the subcommittee for your review and revision. And then, you'll continue to shop that around the different subcommittees, and we'll have kind of a master list that we can continue to add to as time goes on.
Yes. And I'll just say that, this is sort of tangential, but I see this person as having a critical role in this component because it's a very manageable task. We're currently posting for a Green Mountain Global Warming Solutions Act coordinator position right now. And I think there are some discrete programmatic tasks that person can take on. And I think the inventory, which is cross-cutting across the subcommittees, is one that hopefully that person can really help advance. So.
That'd be great. Marley, would you mind just sharing a couple words about what you're pulling together and any kind of questions or feedback you might have for the broader group?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I guess the main point is to emphasize that this is a dynamic document. And one of my biggest questions is how we're going to be able to all add to it. And I know Jane is working on that. Basically, as Billy said, it's just a simple annotated bibliography, the general information, but then also the general purpose of the document as well as any key points in it. So what would be better is for this to be accessible to all, so that folks can add to it themselves. Otherwise, you all send me research documents. I've got to read all of them and come up with those general purposes and key points. And if you already know them and can put them in yourselves, that would sure be helpful. So once we figure out that sharing process, that will be helpful for other folks as well. But basically, this is a list of research. What types of work has been done. Certainly, primarily in the last 10 years, probably, as far as climate strategies, mitigations, priorities. And there are plenty of good docs already, but I certainly don't know all of them. So I very much welcome thoughts from other folks. I have shared in other areas that we are pulling this together. So for example, the Soil Health Network met yesterday, and I told them we were compiling this and asked for any input from them, and not surprisingly got several cool pieces of research. So definitely encourage other folks to look into that and share anything they have, but hopefully we can do this through a more shared document.
Great, thanks, Marley. Any questions or comments from the group on these pieces? All right. So we'll get back to the subcommittee on kind of next steps on both the bibliography and the inventory. Where's my agenda? Okay, so next topic is update from task coordinators, and just a little editorial. And Abby, Jane, and I have discussed this a little bit. I think increasingly we see a lot of the substantive work going forward happening within these task focus areas, and using these weekly standing meetings as an opportunity to kind of share amongst the groups and talk about next steps and strategy, and ideally have more of a standing agenda for these meetings related to reports out from the full climate council, the steering committee, the task groups, etc. So this will likely be an agenda item for this group going forward. I know as a task lead, I have not done much on this between our last meeting and today. That will certainly change going forward. So I don't have high expectations from the rest of you that you might have any updates, but we do have some time for them. And then I can also share the spreadsheet that depicts which staff are going to be supporting which subcommittees. So before I do that, just wanted to see if any of the task leads or members of the task focus groups had any updates they wanted to share with this group. Yeah, Ryan, please.
Updated, don't have much to update. We're on our third doodle, attempting to find a time that works for all members of the council, of the subcommittee, subcommittee. We've been sharing some preparatory documents in advance of the conversation, but not prepared to share that as it hasn't been vetted and discussed. So no concrete update, but we're hoping to meet before next Friday's meeting of the subcommittee, so we can hopefully provide a more substantive update that might include a potential work plan and pathway to get the work done for some task group. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Lauren.
The nature-based solutions focus area is a step ahead and a step behind Ryan. We've successfully completed a doodle and have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday of next week. So if there's any staffers on here that are interested, send me an email and I'll forward you the link to that meeting. But we have not yet started co-creating a work plan yet. So we'll hope to do that, and hopefully next week at our full subcommittee meeting we'll have more to say.
Thank you. I already admitted I have no updates. Abby, anything from you?
Man, what a week. No updates, no doodle, no work plan. I have sent an email, but all the email has resulted so far is getting Alyssa's correct state email into my email. So I've had a lot of, I'm gonna do better next week. I promise. We'll get there. You'll be hearing from me.
I have some things to share to your email in response to your email, so we'll make a little progress with that.
Sweet.
I've been meaning to send something to you.
Thank you, Jake.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to share my screen, or Lauren, do you have another comment? No, okay, cool. And just so you all can see the state of Vermont staff who are, can you all see that? Looking good? Thumbs up. I can't see you all, so someone say something. All right, thanks.
It looks great.
Thank you. So here are the task focus areas that we've discussed. Above the gray row is the members, and below are the state of Vermont staff. I don't have last names, but I could, you know, I can send this to the larger group. But Judson from the Ag Agency and Allie are going to help support the carbon budget work. Marley Roop, Bob Pop, and Allie from A&R, natural land and forest sequestration. Marley, Judson, and Alex from the Ag Agency, the ag sequestration. Bob and Allie, nature-based solutions. And then for the food systems and sustainable economies piece, you know, I think that's something that we want to talk with that group more about to see what sort of support you need there. You know, we've got folks in both the Ag Agency and in the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation that probably have some particularized experience and expertise that could lend to that group that aren't already identified as staff support for the subcommittee, but that I'm sure we could get lined up to help you all. So as you get a little bit deeper into your work and have a sense of what kind of staff support you think would be most helpful, you know, let's have that conversation. And between Ryan and I'm sure we can figure out a way to get you some staff support.
Billy, do you think that this might be a place where, I know that NOFA has offered that they could jump in if need be, and certainly the requisite experience in their staff people is there for food systems. So I can reach out and see if that's something that they're willing to do, if that's helpful, if that violates some sort of, you know, line or whatever. I completely understand, but that thought did just occur to me.
I think it's fine, given I know that our folks are pretty straight out generally, but I would look to Jane as the boss here to let us know if that's something that's acceptable or not.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay, I'll ask Megan Browning if that's something she can help us with and keep everybody posted.
That would be great. Thank you. Yeah, and you know, this is a conversation we haven't had, but I think as the focus groups get into their work, you know, I think we have the flexibility to, or you all have the flexibility to involve other people and resources if that makes sense to you all to get your work done. So, you know, I think there's some formality around the framework of the subcommittees. We're kind of responsible to provide some state staffing to these groups, but then beyond that, I think we really just want to make use of whatever available resources are out there to get the work done and come up with the best product. So I'll leave it to you all to kind of figure out how to navigate that, and we can just check in on a regular basis on what you're thinking. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I'll send this information out to everyone so you have it separately. So those are really the substantive items that we had on the agenda today. You know, we had more time for this task coordinator update. You know, we're early in the process, so it's understandable we didn't use it all. But before we move on to setting an agenda and assignments for next week and then public comment, is there anything else this group would like to discuss? Okay. So I've been keeping a little list for an agenda for next week. Certainly we will spend a good amount of time on the ranking matrix to finalize the criteria as we discussed. You know, the associated assignment is that Lauren will send out the current draft, and then we as a group will get comments back to Lauren by close of business Wednesday on those criteria. And then hopefully we'll get something out to the group in advance of Friday, or we'll just walk through the document on Friday. Alex put something in the chat related to double counting, discussing double counting as an agenda item. And I don't know, Alex, if you want to kind of expound on that at all and to see if others feel like that's something that we should discuss next week.
It might be premature, but who brought it up? Was it David or Alyssa agreed or whatever? Like, oh, and then Allie weighed in on it too. Like, how do we know what's already happening in these nature-based sequestration things? I guess we need to talk about that at some point, if it's even within our subcommittee charge, but at some point somebody's going to need to address it as we proceed here. That's all. So whether it's ripe for us or even is ours, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's probably something that will come out through the kind of finalization of the carbon budget and then the work of the different task groups. So it might be a little bit early for an agenda item for us, but I see Jane has her hand up, so feel free to speak to that.
A couple things. I think it relates a little bit to the greenhouse gas inventory, and it certainly relates to life cycle emissions. A format for how we could do the greenhouse gas inventory, and there's been a lot of spotlight on that lately. I wanted to just sort of put a plug in that GEC staff and the Science and Data Committee are talking a lot about how best to sort of create a common understanding of like the greenhouse gas inventory as it is done now and create a conversation or a dialogue to support subcommittee members asking questions about that. And I will say that I had been meaning to send this email out for subcommittee members and I haven't gotten to it this week, but encouraging subcommittee members who weren't present at the first few council meetings where Peter Walk and Colin Smythe presented on the greenhouse gas inventory. I think that because it informs so many aspects of the work that we're all working towards with the Climate Action Plan, that presentation that was given to the Climate Council is a good first step. I think we need to go a little farther along down into that with subcommittee work, and how we do that is being thought. But I do want to just draw subcommittee members' attention to that presentation so that we can all be grounded in a common understanding of how the greenhouse gas inventory is done now and the protocols that guide it. And then just let you know that we're thinking about how to communicate and have a chance to discuss the greenhouse gas inventory. And that certainly doesn't get at everything that you're suggesting, Alex, in the carbon budget, but it's also just a good underpinning for that information.
Okay, thanks, Jane. So yeah, I don't know that. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to ask if you have the link to the presentation, Jane, do you mind sending it to everybody on the subcommittee so that they can just get it quickly?
Yeah, sorry, that's what I meant to say. That's my intent is to share the slide deck and the presentation video. Just haven't gotten to it yet, but look for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as far as agenda goes, I think we're gonna have, sorry, I've got like 15 screens open. We're gonna have, standing agenda items. Like, I think we'll have a steering committee meeting between now and our next meeting. So we'll have a report out from that. We'll have report out from the task coordination groups. We'll probably have a placeholder for the inventory of existing programs and resource bibliography, just to keep folks apprised if there's updates there. Jane, do you think we'll need any time to talk about the final RFP or the comments received related to the carbon budget?
My hope is that it will be out before next Friday. So I'd be happy to spend a few minutes with Allie's help synthesizing any changes that were made, if that's helpful for folks who aren't involved in providing comments. But yeah,
I think a brief agenda item on that would be helpful. Great. And then, something that Jake just kind of raised in the chat is the overall kind of timeline and milestones for the task coordination work, and whether we want to just have a global check-in on that, so we're all kind of on the same page around the pace that we need to do this work. Sorry to interrupt, Billy, but I think that's a great idea. And I did hear
It was more with respect to the document that David and Alyssa and Lauren were walking us all through, but the idea of supported by the next step of that 2 weeks out with Pat Field joining the facilitator. I thought that was a great idea. And I kind of feel like that same conversation perhaps with him here could be around milestones, because next week at the steering committee, the bulk of that meeting will be preparing for the climate council meeting the following week or two. I can't remember. I'm losing track of when the climate council meets. I actually think it's 2 weeks after that still, which is surprising to me still. You'll note that I sent out the wrong invite because I wanted it to be a week sooner than it was. But we'll have the bulk of that meeting, and then ultimately the council meeting will be around a substantive outline for the full climate action plan, which then again will have be informed by all the work of the subcommittees and setting milestones. And I think the more consistent we can get with respect to thinking about timeline and milestones across the subcommittees will be really important. And that's definitely my job to help give you guys tools for that, as well as support with the facilitators. So if not next week with the milestones, perhaps the week after with the support of Pat Field here, I think that would be a really productive conversation.
Okay. And then any other topics, folks? I do really like David's thought of like, how do we make sure that the recommendations that come out of the various task coordinators are framed in a consistent way. I don't know if we're ready for that conversation next week, but if folks would like to get into that, we certainly would have the time. So I'll put it back to you all on what your thoughts are. We do it next Friday or a meeting shortly thereafter. Silence. All right, well, Abby and I will take a little co-chair discretion, and we'll figure out if we want to throw that in next week or at a following meeting. Anything else we want to include in our agenda for next Friday? Okay. Silence is golden. So at this point, I think we're probably ready to move on to public comment, barring any other comments from members. And I just want to preface it by saying that I do need to step off around 11:30. Ryan is recording the meeting, so he can stay on and continue if we go past then. So if I just disappear, thanks everyone for your participation today. If there are members of the public that would like to speak, please use the raised hand tool within the Teams app if you're able to. And if not, just speak up. So I see Jennifer. Are there any members of the public other than Jennifer that are interested in speaking this morning? Zach, Graham. Okay. So looks like we've got 3 folks. Anyone else? So the order will go in are Jennifer Ramstetter, Zach Porter, and Graham. I'm going to let you pronounce your last name when you speak. You can go third. And please take a couple of minutes to share your comments with the subcommittee. And a reminder that we do have a public portal now that's available through the Vermont Climate Council website for folks to provide written comments at any point. So Jennifer, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I just had a couple of questions. The first was, I wondered if that co-benefit matrix would be available for public comment. I have a couple of general comments, but I would love to see it again if it is available publicly.
I can say that we're working to get all of the documents that this group uses up on the website. I've initiated that process. They're not up yet, but I believe a draft of the matrix will go up as well. And certainly we would, we welcome any written comments you'd have on that through the portal.
Okay,
That'll,
do
I'm
that
sure
by
that'll
Wednesday.
go, sorry, Jennifer, I'm sure that'll go up today. And just so when you, if you haven't used the public input form yet, when you do, there's a drop down to direct your comments specifically to a subcommittee, and it batches them for those, for the subcommittee. So if those comments are specific to the Ag and Ecosystems subcommittee, just make sure you select that if you'd like.
Great, thank you so much. My other question had to do with the focus groups, and I would love to be of help to a couple of those focus groups if when the time is right for that. So just wanted to offer that up. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, Zach Border.
Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to actually, well, first off, say thank you, as always, for your continued work here, and echo Jennifer's comments just a second ago, and to pick up where she left off. I wanted to just make maybe a little more specific ask about whether those subgroups are, whether the plan is for them to be public meetings. And if so, whether this committee will just make it, very obvious on the website how, a member of the public can join those meetings. So just to put maybe a finer point on Jennifer's comment a second ago, I also just wanted to make a couple other questions. Marley Roop spoke to you all about the bibliography that she's developing, and there as well, I was wondering about the opportunity for the public to, submit, reports and other documentation. And so if that is also something that this, committee is seeking, then just to make that clear to the public as well, how, materials can be submitted to that. And maybe that's just through the portal on the Climate Council website, or maybe there's some other way, but wanted to just flag that. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it there for now. Thank you very much, and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Zach. Graham.
Can I, Billy, do you want me to respond to Zach a little bit?
Sure, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would, Zach, only. So just speaking to the task leads and the work there, the intent is to not have those be open meetings in order to have some efficiency with workflow. That is not to subvert open meeting laws in any way, and recognizing that is simply an efficiency of trying to get some work together to have substantive conversations about what is done in those meetings at these subcommittee meetings. So I do not hope or want the public to feel like any decisions about any of the important work that'll be happening or need to happen for this subcommittee will be done like independent of these subcommittee meetings. It will be put together to be posted and vetted at these meetings in a substantive way. So the intent is just to carry work into these meetings, but recognizing that the effort and efficiency of having to do open meetings for everything, it can be challenging with document sharing and everything. Of course, all of those meetings are open to Freedom of Information Act. So if there's ever any question about what's happening outside of the subcommittee meetings, people are free to get those records and request those. And then as far as Marley's work, I'll just suggest that, the public input forum has a link to upload files and articles with it. And maybe Marley and I can talk a little bit about how I keep her apprised or suggest that the work that's uploaded that way makes its way to Marley's doc and then is shared with the subcommittee in an efficient way.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. The last thing I'll add in response to Zach's comment is that this task coordination, I think, is going to be less about meetings going forward than just people working on the same topic. So I think understandably there may be an interest in the task coordinators to pull the group together initially to kind of talk through how they're going to do their work. But going forward, I don't think there's going to be a lot of meetings per se. I think it's going to be a group of people working on similar tasks, sharing information and emails, etc. Occasionally meeting, but I don't think it's going to have the same sort of structure as this group does. It's just a way for us to kind of organize our efforts. Okay, Graham, please share your thoughts with the group.
Thanks, folks. And first of all, this is my first meeting I've attended, and I was only able to make part of it as I was dealing with my year-old child before that. But it's great to hear some of the things you're talking about and see this matrix you're looking at. And it sounds like I should do some background research on myself in terms of that greenhouse gas inventory presentation or otherwise to further contextualize the work you're doing. If I didn't already say it, I'm the policy director at Rural Vermont, and I have a few questions. One comment to start with, and that's sort of about the importance of not only inventorying, but also considering how existing programs could be improved or expanded. I think at the national level and at the global level, we're seeing a lot of conversations related to climate change and agriculture come up, and a lot of the civil society organizations, we're members of the National Family Farm Coalition, La Via Campesina internationally, the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, have a pretty critical stance on a lot of the carbon offset programs. And right now we're seeing the Biden administration, Tom Vilsack, also, being approached with a lot of carbon offset, quote unquote, payment for ecosystem services types programs put out there. Civil society organizations are going to be boycotting the upcoming UN Food Summit this September. So I think there's some importance about this international context. And part of the message coming out of those folks is just the importance of looking at these existing programs, how they can be amended, improved, and refunded, because they've become very underfunded, as well as a lot of technical assistance across the agricultural realm and across agencies over time. So let's put that out there, one. And the other questions, when you talk about these other benefits as co-benefits, is that characterization because there's a primary importance of carbon being recognized by this group, or are you all approaching this from a little bit more of a holistic perspective, where these are sort of recognized as direct benefits? I'm trying to understand what that characterization will mean and how you're looking at things. And I'm also just curious to know a little bit more about this carbon budget. And this might be something I just have to do more research into. But I saw sequestration abbreviated in the columns of that spreadsheet. So I was just curious about the budget, what type of system it might ultimately be integrated into, or if that's what you're sort of contemplating, and how your consideration is related to sequestration versus carbon throughput in these systems are. Like when I saw sequestration in those columns, is that referring to basically that being the primary consideration, or is sort of carbon throughput on a farm by farm basis or on a sector by sector basis what's being looked at as well? Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you
Graham.
for that,
I think,
Graham.
no, go ahead, Abby. You're the co-chair.
You go first, because you can probably identify the more specific answers to some of the carbon budget and the sequestration specific questions, and then I'll go after that.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, no, I was going to ask if Allie was still on and wanted to speak to that process. I was just going to jump in briefly to share my understanding is the focus on that matrix was a sub part of the draft prioritization framework, where in statute it is more directed around cost effectiveness, technical feasibility, and equity considerations. And so, however, the group is, based on what I've heard and seen, very focused on making sure we evaluate co-benefits as a part of the calculus to identify practices or programs that may help address some of the charges of the working group. So I think that's for the focus on that new matrix today within the subcommittee discussion.
Yeah, that was essentially what I felt like I could comfortably address as well, is that per the statute, the focus is really honed in around anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, but we're really trying to take as much of a holistic approach to this as we possibly can, and so that matrix is an attempt to sort of build out a broader picture around just the sort of more straightforward goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Regarding the way that we're approaching or counting carbon sequestration, I will admit I am not entirely certain as to how to answer that question specifically. So I'm happy to have anybody else take a stab at that, but also Graham, I'm happy to follow up with you at another point to try to better get at what you're looking for answer wise and try to get those questions answered for you.
And I think some of the carbon budget is around taking some of the parameters from the federal inventories and protocols that exist that haven't necessarily been run for, in the emissions inventory, there certainly is considerations for forestry land uses, but there's some other considerations which are outlined more specifically in the Technical Services RFP, for which there are protocols but haven't been run in Vermont. And so my understanding is the Technical Service RFP is asking a contractor to look into an appropriate methodology or propose a few different methodologies for how to expand that accounting. And as was discussed in this working group conversation, I think it's focused on certainly not a baseline, but rather just this moment in time, and we could be able to track movement of flux and soil carbon stores through a number of different land uses would be an output of that protocol if it's adopted based on whatever a contractor proposes.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Were there any other public comments? Jennifer, is your hand up again, or was that from before, just to clarify? Oh, okay. Jane?
I have a comment for the end, but I can wait till, I just wanted to put a plug in for that. Happy to talk now or wait if there's other comment.
I don't think I see. Lauren, did you have something you wanted to add?
It's more of a troubleshooting question with Teams. I just realized this whole time I haven't had access to the chat, and I think that happened to Alyssa last time. So I might just check in with Alyssa. I think maybe John doesn't either. Is that what that thumbs up meant? Yeah. Okay.
I can give an update on that too, actually.
Oh, good.
Okay, so 2 updates then. First, I wanted to just recognize that Sophia actually had to drop off, but Sophia's replacement has been appointed. And Ira, I actually should have it in front of me, Iris's last name, but Iris is maybe she's on because I think she's the liaison with all of you. Yeah. Iris sits on the Just Transitions as a subcommittee member and also has been acting as a liaison with all of you in this committee. And she's been officially appointed as a council member. And so she will be a great addition. And I couldn't remember where our conversation went last time with Sophia, but Sophia's asked to step down 100 completely. So she will not serve on the subcommittee at all anymore either. And so I just wanted to put that out there, and if there's a need to reconsider membership or think about anything, but just wanted to put a pin in that. And then also we are moving forward with Zoom, and our executive assistant for the agency secretary for Julie is working on getting me an account. And so we'll have multiple licenses, but going forward, as soon as that's in place, I will schedule all of the subcommittee meetings, as well as all the council and steering committee meetings as well. And so some of the things to discuss, my assumption is the meetings for subcommittee meetings will just be one link Zoom meetings, not the way we did the council meeting last time where there were panelists and the public, and then you invited the public in at the end for comment. But just I'll be working with co-chairs to consider how we manage those going forward. But stay tuned. Hopefully we can get those up and running next week.
Okay, great. Thank you for that update, Jane. Is there anything else that anybody needed to add? Any final thoughts for the day? I would like to just apologize for my delayed entrance today. Hopefully the powers that be in the internet world will cooperate moving forward, although that seems unlikely. But fingers crossed, and appreciation again, as usual, for everybody for coming today. And it's Friday, right? So have a great weekend. See you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.